Lauren Grace here. Welcome to the Afterlight. I'm joined today by Natasha Rocha, and she has always been interested in understanding diverse customs, cultures, and beliefs. Natasha has been fortunate. I'm going to start that all again, actually. It's Rocha, right? I feel like I said it wrong.
You said it right. No, you said it right.
Okay, great. All right, we'll try one more time. Here we go. Hi, Lauren Grace here, and welcome to the Afterlight. And I'm joined today by Natasha Rocha, and she has always been interested in understanding diverse customs, cultures, and beliefs. Fortunate enough to be born into a fifth-generation spiritually gifted and awakened family, she developed her spiritual abilities in a completely safe and encouraging environment. Goosebumps. Living in South Africa exposed her to the good, the bad, and the downright ugly of the spiritual realm. Wanting to explore this world a little further, at the age of 21, Natasha set off to travel Europe to learn and experience other cultures firsthand. She found herself settling in Edinburgh, Scotland, where she lived for 13 years, using it as a base while visiting other European countries. She then moved to Canada, represent, for 10 years, and she now resides back in Scotland with her family and her two dogs. One of the biggest turning points in Natasha's life was the induction to the Akashic records. In her ideal world, alternative therapies and Western medicine collaborate and complement each other. She decided to formalize her hands-on healing abilities by diving into Reiki and craniosacral work. She founded Rising the Vibes Academy of Consciousness, an online spiritual learning membership that allows people to develop their existing spiritual abilities and their spidey senses. And Natasha is joining me for what I can already determine is going to be an amazing conversation. We're going to be chatting about craniosacral work or craniosacral therapy and the Akashic records. Natasha, welcome. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This is so exciting. I'm always happy to talk about the Akashic records and craniosacral work as well.
It's just lovely to meet like soul sisters, and, I'm Canadian. I lived in Scotland. I was telling you before I hit record that Scotland has my heart, and it's just lovely to meet people, on all walks of life. And I'm so glad to have you here and to be educating me and our listener at home. So, Natasha, you have had a very interesting life. And it sounds to me like you have been on the spiritual path right from the get-go. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Was there ever a time that you kind of got off it? Have you just always known it?
No, absolutely. So as you said, fifth generation, very, very lucky to be born into a family where spiritual abilities were just normal, right? So, which was great. And it's quite interesting because my grandfather had an underground kind of like spiritual school in Mozambique. And that was quite interesting. That was kind of like at the turn, kind of like, just before the Civil War and everything. And what happened, the cool thing about that was that a whole bunch of people would meet Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to do kind of like development work and mediumship and all sorts of things. And so they started to get nervous. And somebody from the Secret Service actually went in to see if it was something that was against the government that they were doing. And this gentleman actually kind of like ended up telling my grandfather the reasons why he joined. And then obviously reported back that there was nothing against the government that was happening. But even after that, he continued to stay and develop his own spiritual abilities, which is amazing. Wow. So this is the kind of work that I came in and it was so interesting in the sense that my brother and I, luckily I had a partner in crime, would be able to share the experiences and kind of like, oh, did you see that ghost? Oh, did you see this? Oh my goodness, that was but apart from not only the spiritual development, we did a lot of hands-on healing, which was very, very interesting. It's very cool. And then eventually I grew up. It was never something that we really spoke about because, I mean, it was people would just disappeared or, or so I never thought I would be able to actually do it, work in spirituality and help others in the way that I do today. And then 21, being from South Africa, I'm like, I'm going to go travel to Europe, right? Because that is first world. This is where society is going. And I love cultures. Yeah. And I met my Portuguese side of the family because a lot of them lived in Portugal. So I ended up in the UK being totally open, totally aware. and got here, and I'd be walking in and I'd see so much stuff, and I was by myself. So I was kind of like, this is a little bit scary. Don't really know the techniques in how to release, how to attachments that I pick up on the way home, plus I was 21, like, and when you know better, you need to do better, right? And I was like, I want to travel the world, I want to experience things. So I kind of started to shut that down a little bit, and I call it hitting the snooze button, because I was like still conscious and aware, and reading a lot of books, but I wasn't kind of like practicing. I mean, I was traveling, I did Pamplona running of the bulls and all sorts of stuff like that. So yeah, and then being in Canada, I met a Canadian, and and got married, had 2 children, and the birth of my daughter was the first kind of like, wait a minute, it kind of like just tripped something in me to start kind of like starting to become more aware. And it's quite interesting, because I'd always spoken to my husband about all of the spirituality and theory, and then I started seeing a lot of things again, and I think I totally freaked him out when we first moved to Canada, and I was living in Calgary, Alberta, which is right next to Lake Louise, which is a massive portal.
Is it? I've been there, but I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's Archangel Michael is the archangel that looks after that portal. So shifting into that energy started to awaken a lot more things. So I remember being there for about a week, and I started getting a message, because I used to do a lot of automatic writing, and I ignored it because it was 5 o'clock in the morning. And then eventually my ex-husband got up, and I was like, I need a piece of paper and a pen. And he was like, what for? And I said, I'm getting a message. And he was like, what? I was like, please just get me a piece of paper and a pen. And then he was like, you want to ask for the lottery numbers? I was like, dude, it doesn't work like that. But he started to automatically write a message, and it was from his grandfather to his dad, about us arriving there. And then I was like, okay, now I have to share this message. And they don't know the side of me, but I was like, it's not my message. It is what it is. And I sent it out. And from there, things started to happen. And then, I started to reawaken again, or to
Remember,
step into my spirituality. Yeah.
So amazing. I love hearing about all of that. There are so many things that I want to talk to you about. And I actually feel emotional when you're talking about Archangel Michael, and I don't know why. It's just, he's such a powerful, beautiful angel. I just really connect with him. And it just felt like a lot of emotion when you were talking about that. Can you tell me a little bit about your strategy for automatic writing? Because I know people do it differently. And I always like to know kind of how you recommend people get started. Is it just meditating and waking up and writing down the inspiration that you get, kind of like the way these sort of started?
Yeah, there's quite a few ways of, journaling is a great way to kind of like introduce into automatic writing. There's a method of journaling where you wake up first thing in the morning and you write for 3 pages. You don't think, you don't do anything, you just whatever comes into mind. The way I started doing it is very much meditative. So in all my spiritual practices, and I've tested all of them, because I always encourage my students to question everything and to test everything. But one thing that I found that sets me up for success is always the space of grounding, centering, and connecting. So creating that sacred space in order to do the spiritual work. So with regards to automatic writing, I'd always meditate, a little bit, ground, center myself, and I would sit with a piece of paper. And there's something about pen and paper, or pencil and paper, that actually triggers something within your brain that starts to open you up to writing. And what I would do is I would either ask a question, or I would sit and I'd wait. And whatever came into my mind, I would write in. And it used to start with kind of like a word. And then it was a word, and then sorry, I'm just getting, I would get a word, and then I'd be like, nope. And then it would continue until I wrote it down. And then once I wrote it down, I'd get the next word, and then the next sentence would come in, and then I was writing paragraphs. But my suggestion is, on the same day, same time, sit. And with your journal, meditate, ground, center, and connect. And this is a great way to connect to your guides as well. So it's almost kind of like there's there's this stream of thought that automatic writing absolutely comes in from where, you know, spirit takes over and you don't know what you're writing. And that happens to me all the time in Akashic records, where I tend to write a message, I give it out, and then months later people are like, you know, when you told me, and I was like, no, I don't. You know, it kind of like, it releases. And then when I read it, I'm like, wow, that was quite profound. You know, I know it's not from me, right? But it's practice, and it's trust, because the ego tends to try and jump in. We try to kind of like correct the structure of the sentence or the word, or sometimes we're like, this doesn't even make sense until you continue to write. So my recommendation: ground, center, connect, sit with paper, pen, a journal, and just allow the flow of whatever comes into your mind to run through, and then eventually it will start kind of like messages.
Beautiful. Do you ever ask a question and then wait for the answer?
Absolutely. And this is what helped me with the Akashic records when I found the records. So I would connect consciously to the records and I'd ask the question, why? What is this happening? Why am I in this, you know, this house, and or whatever it may be? And that helped me to kind of like navigate my world. And that's where the Akashic records I found to be very, very, very a powerful tool in helping me to overcome and move very much from a very corporate way of thinking, a corporate way of life, into the spirituality and supporting and being of service that I am today.
I love that. I'm going to talk to you in a little bit all about the Akashic records. I know our listener at home is like, let's go now, but no, we have other things to talk about first. Yes. One of the things I want to ask you about, Natasha, and I actually took it out of your bio because I cut it down a little bit, but you made reference to choosing to be born into a Portuguese family, I believe you said. And I want to talk to you a little bit about the concept of, choosing a life path, choosing our parents, choosing our, I guess our missions and what we're supposed to be here. I would love to hear your sort of thoughts on that. I know that at times it can be a difficult thing for people to kind of feel is true if they've had a difficult upbringing or situations that happen. I'm just kind of wondering what your thoughts are on that. Do we choose a plan? Do we go up? Do we work it out in the astral? Do we come back? What do? We get off the plan? Is it part of the plan to get off the plan? Just anything that you feel called to speak about in terms of your own journey, I guess.
Absolutely. So before we're born, we actually we create a blueprint, a soul blueprint. And in this blueprint, this is my belief, and in the soul blueprint, we create every possibility and every probability based on every single decision that we make. Okay. But so some of us, we talk about, what is my purpose? What is my mission? Why am I here? Right. And a lot of the times we choose the experiences that we want to experience, or we come on mission to change one thing or another. And what happens is that in order to step into the vibrational frequency to live that or experience that, we need to grab substance. So what we do is we go to the lineages, we go to people. So for example, I believe that we choose our parents because within their genetics, within that lineage, both lineages, there are the gifts and there are the traumas that we inherit as well. So it's almost kind of like there's the handicaps that we choose, there's the life lessons that we choose, and it creates the palette. So we choose everything. So not only do we choose the lineage and the genetics that are there, but we also choose the time, the day, the place. Everything has a frequency that adds to your frequency, that adds to your experience. So all of that, so there's astrology and there's numerology, we choose it all up to like the exact moment that we are born. We align all the planets to create even our name. We choose our name because our name holds a frequency, and that helps us, which is quite interesting because I'm going through a change in kind of like changing my surname from back to my maiden name. So it's trying to sit back into the frequency of Rocha again. And what does this mean to me after being, for the last 15 years? So it's all about vibration and frequency and what we draw towards us. And as we step into that, so if you think about actors, they do a kind of like special method acting. They step into that name, they step into that persona to have that experience. So we choose it all. And a lot of the times, especially if we've gone through serious intergenerational traumas, a lot of the time the soul comes to say, okay, it stops with me. Right. And they're born into that family, they experience that. And as they experience those traumas, it creates a vibrational frequency within us that then, you know, once we overcome it or heal that, if we have that opportunity, we then, a lot of purpose is birthed in that to help others go that have been through the same thing, to help them through it. And when we help them through it, it is a service on a collective, because when we heal ourselves, we heal 7 generations before, 7 generations to come, right? And if you think about that on a collective basis, everybody else is helping that, you know, so it kind of like it's, if we do the work internally, we're actually really helping the collective. And sometimes that's all we have to do is just work on ourselves, which is important. So long story short, we absolutely choose everything up to the, we don't stop choosing. That's the thing. So we create this blueprint, we're born into it, and every moment of every day we choose, we make a decision, and that informs the opportunities, the circumstances that we draw towards us. And it's quite interesting because people are like, who am I? Why am I here?
Yeah. What's the point of this?
What's the point of this? And it's to get to know who we are. It's to experience that firsthand. And life I see as really kind of, it's a playground. We have all these opportunities to experience everything from extreme poverty to extreme richness. And we have the power to change that now in this moment.
How do you keep life not so serious? You know, you talked about changing your, you know, your name back to your maiden name. I would imagine that this is a difficult time, or, you know, you've gone through a difficult time. How do you keep things light and not so serious? And how do you experience life as a playground?
So, yeah, that's quite an interesting question. When I was younger, so I grew up during apartheid, being white kid, being kind of like, you know, also being a foreigner because I was also Portuguese. So there was a whole bunch of that. And it's interesting. So I used to look at what was going on and I'd be like, why? Like, what is the point of this? What am I supposed to see? What am I supposed to learn? And then once I had that thread of, okay, this is what you need to learn, the situation would dissolve itself. Now, this last year for me has been quite interesting year, in the sense that not only did I move countries, got divorced, you know, and I moved with 2 children, 2 dogs, a mom, and everything else. It was very, very stressful. I started taking one day at a time, and I'd wake up in the morning and I would set up my day. I'd be like, today is a day of magic and miracles. So I would set up the frequency for the day, no matter how hard it was. And sometimes it was hard to smile, and I would smile first thing in the morning, and I'd be like, okay, today's a day of magic and miracle. And then I'd say, what is one thing that I need to do today? And then I'd listen in to my body. You know, I'd be like, okay, what do I need physically, mentally, and emotionally today? And then step into that. And that's how I moved through that difficult time, in that sense of kind of like, what is just the one thing that I need to do today? And yeah, and very, very grateful. And again, using the tools that I had. And this is where, because I teach as well, is kind of like, put your money where your mouth is. What are the tools that you teach? Embody them. So, and then with a lot of love and compassion and understanding, that it took to go through that, not only with me, but with my ex-husband, with the children, with everything, because everybody is going through something, right? So it's, I stepped into observation, and made sure that I was okay within me, and very, very grounded. That's how I moved through that.
Thank you for sharing that. You know, when you're talking, I was thinking about, I wanted to ask this question before that one, but then that one, you know, felt like it was important to be asked first. I wanted to ask you whether or not you think we plan these things alone, or, and I've read different books, and I always like to hear different people's, you know, perspectives. Do you believe that, you know, much like we choose our parents, that we're also choosing our partners, that we're, you know, And then I want to ask you a little bit about, how do you get the support and the encouragement from your guides? How do you feel them around you? How do you navigate that?
Absolutely. I absolutely believe that we choose the people into in our lives, because they come to support our journey. They come to teach us, and no matter what direction we choose, those energies will align, right? And sometimes we have, and I call them spiritual contracts. So a lot of the times in the Akashic records, you'll hear about contracts, deals, and agreements. So we create these on a soul level to support the journey that we're in, right? So for example, I'll give you an example. I used to do marketing for some very, very technical companies. Ended up working in oil and gas in Calgary, Alberta, as you do. It's a very big industry there. And I experienced workplace bullying for the very first time in my life. And it was brutal. It started to affect me physically, but that was my kind of like my timeout. Like, what do I need to do physically, mentally, emotionally? What is happening spiritually to me? I'm blocked. But to that person that I drew into my life, she was a significant energy in my life, because it was because of that difficult time that I was like, no, I'm going to go into spirituality. It totally changed my trajectory.
Yeah.
That time. And now I'm in a place where I have the utmost gratitude for that experience. Maybe not at the time, but it was kind of like, now it's just like, look at the amount of people I've managed to support, and the people that have come into my life. I'm super grateful for that. So it's like, sometimes, and in Portuguese we say, sometimes bad things happen so that better ones can come along. And it's kind of like the leaning tower card, where your life blows up and it's order to create new. So we absolutely choose everyone in our life. We are creators of our environment. We're constantly choosing.
Yeah, that's so well said. And I want to bring it back to what you said before, which is, what am I supposed to see? What am I supposed to learn?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. That's so good. So, I know that today we're going to be talking about craniosacral therapy and the Akashic records, and I feel like I probably need to take us to task. I guess the thing is, I just want to ask again quickly, do you think that we work on our plan during our dreaming state on the astral level? Do you think we work with our guides, to kind of see how things are going and to adjust? And I also wanted to know whether or not you could kind of speak to people who don't know why they're here and whether they're figuring out. And I know you were talking about, well, it's time to get to know yourself and things like that. And maybe that's the answer. But do you think we all have this, this calling or a purpose, or is, any thoughts on all that? It's quite a few questions in one. I apologize.
No problem. Yeah, I think we call in support systems to help us, because even our guides are on mission. Even our guides, we have contracts with them as we progress throughout our lives. But yeah, and I also believe that sometimes we've come here just to experience this planet unconsciously, right? And that's okay. And yeah, it all depends. It's the experiences, and there's no judgment on whether you do or whether you don't. So it's, and that's what's given me compassion and understanding where people are at, because that's what they're choosing to experience, in that sense. So if they do want to be unconscious, it's just that we don't have to, we choose to be in that frequency or not, be in that timeline or not. And that's how I've started navigating this world. So we absolutely choose our the people around us, our guides. So with our guides, it's quite interesting. So my guide that I work with in the Akashic Records is Emmanuel, but I also work very much with Saint Germain when I'm doing my clearings. So it all becomes in resonance throughout the journey that we're working on. So very much also working with Christ consciousness, so the Mother Mary, Jesus, and part of the ascension. And then, so it totally depends on the journey. As you grow, as you expand, as you become more conscious, you have other supports that match the resonance that you're at or what you've chosen to do throughout your lifetime. So our guides are constantly changing, not constantly changing. Some of our guides change. Some of them are with us entire lifetimes, but even our guides, that is part of their growth and development, part of them being of service. So they're also in that space of learning and expanding, which is quite interesting from that perspective.
Yeah, I think that's so, I think the whole thing is just, it's amazing. And, I know for myself, I do a lot of self-reflection to the point where I really need to work on my grounding. Honestly, it's something that I struggle with. I think grounding, but I feel sometimes really connected to my guides and other times not at the same time. So it's just something that I'm kind of navigating myself, and I'm sure that other people can relate to that. It's like, have I hit the snooze button, or am I am I needing to navigate this part by myself? It's interesting.
And sometimes there is a little bit of navigating on our own, but there's also sometimes part for integration work. So sometimes when we do a lot of spiritual work, we need to allow it to integrate and to kind of like settle in, so that those frequencies can kind of like really kind of like, so we can start living this integration part of that is important. And sometimes it's weird. It's almost kind of like being seated, in the ground where it's dark, it's quiet. It's that void aspect to allow for the integration to happen with the new knowledge or the experiences that you've gotten.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. Thank you for that reminder. So let's get into the concept now, or the subject, the beautiful subject of the Akashic records. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how you first got introduced, and how would you explain them to somebody who hasn't heard of them before? When I think of the Akashic records, I personally haven't spent a lot of time exploring them. I'm open to it. I guess I just haven't done it, but I always think of some beautiful grand library in a huge, gorgeous auditorium. And I have done a few meditations now and again, but how does it show up for you, and how did it originally get kicked off?
Yeah, so it's quite interesting in the sense that when I went through that reawakening phase, I was like, okay, hands-on healing. What's this called in English? And I ended up like typing in hands-on healing, and Reiki popped up. And so that was a good kind of like way of kind of clearing, starting to really work on myself. But then straight after that, the Akashic records, honestly, it was like, I think it was the Thursday I saw that there was a course. There was a lady from Vancouver that came into Calgary that was teaching the course. And a friend of mine that I'd done Reiki with was hosting it. So I texted her, just sent her a message and said, it just really called to me. It was like, I was excited about it. I was like, what is this? I need to know about this. So I sent her a message and said, there's still space. And then I dropped in on the Saturday. And when I came in on the Saturday, that weekend workshop was very, very healing. But it also helped me to reactivate the intuitive side of me that I had kind of like shut down or numbed or whatever, or hit the snooze button on. So that helped me to become conscious about really starting to connect. And as I used to do a lot of automatic writing when I was younger, and I found that was a great way to start to connect to the records. And that it was really enhancing my intuition, and really getting to know who I am on a soul level. Because I was a very curious person. And if somebody said to me, no, I would be like, what do you mean no? I was like, watch me. But if I had the reason like, why behind it, then I'd be like, okay, that makes sense. And that's where starting to really connect with the Akashic records through automatic writing, through journaling, through asking those questions. Why am I here? Why am I going through this? Why am I in Canada? Why have I just, bought a house? Like, and the answers were starting to come through that were like, oh yeah, that makes sense. All the rest of that, it started to give me an understanding of, okay, what's going on. And even before my divorce, so for example, I channeled before my divorce, connected to the Akashic records, and I said, what's going on here? And they said, no, all that it is progression against comfort is starting to come up, and now it needs to change, right? And it kind of like gives you that, oh yeah, okay, it doesn't have to be difficult. This is exactly what's happening in the background. So it gave me that background information to understand what this next phase of my life is. So, and it was very much when I first started to connect to the records, I started seeing it as a library, because we do tend to think knowledge and wisdom connected with books and scrolls,
Yes.
right? And a lot of
Yes.
the times we go into this hall of records where it hosts everything energetically. But then I also started to kind of like jump into different past lifetimes, things like that, that would inform my sessions. And then I started to say, okay, so the Akashic Records is really the Google of spirituality, because you have access to everything, right? And it was like long before Google, but it was like, no, it's like Google, you know? And I was like, wouldn't it be amazing if I could make the Akashic Records as easy to navigate as it is to Google something,
Yeah.
you know? So it became this spiritual search engine for me, right? And I was like, this is brilliant, because you could tap into the records of the moon when it was a full moon, a new moon, or what's happening in Jupiter, or whatever it was. And then I started to realize, wait a minute, the Akashic Records is a lot more than just the Google of the spiritual world. It is the matrix. The more I started to expand, I was like, no, this is the thread or the fabric that creates everything. And I was like, whoa, I was like, holy smokes. And I started to realize that is the fabric. And then where I'm at the moment with the Akashic Records and having experienced it is that, I don't know if you've heard of Mateus de Stefano, where he talks about the 9 dimensions, where he talks about the first dimension holding all the knowledge, wisdom, everything that is there. And it's almost kind of like having a library full of books, but never experiencing any of the stories. And that's what the Akashic, so that starts to, I was like, no, that is the Akashic Records. And this is what we're doing in this world. What we're doing in this incarnation is experiencing. Or writing one of those stories that are there. And that's the part where we're all one, where we're all connected. And then I started to realize that the Akashic Records is the element that creates the elements, that creates the stories, that creates the program, that creates the matrix, that creates everything. And it's not something that is out there. It's something that if you connect within, because we're connected, we are the Akashic Records. We are enjoying this matrix, this virtual reality, this experience that we're at. So I don't know if that's too much information.
Wow. No, it's definitely not too much. No.
It's such as the Google of the spiritual world. It's Google of everything. It's the simplistic way that I thought of.
It's brilliant. I love it. And, you know, our listener at home they've been on this journey with me for a while. They know a lot. So that's perfect. They can handle that. I guess my question to you is, do you sit down and go, okay, I want to consciously connect with the Akashic, and then things pop into your head, or you do the automatic writing, or you even speak out things? Is it kind of like, do you have to attend to go there, or is your desire to be a channel of the light enough for you to tap into that? Because the Akashic is everything anyway. It's just a way of us titling everything, because we don't say everything everywhere. I just watched that movie, Everything Everywhere All of the Time. We don't say that. We call it something to just make it, I guess, simpler to understand. And I was thinking about, how can your brain even conceptualize all that, right?
Absolutely. So I've had many moments waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning going, have I totally lost it? And do I need to commit myself? Because this is just like, there's a lot of information.
I think that way for myself too.
Yeah. So in the beginning, I would definitely kind of like meditate, put myself in that vibrational frequency to connect to the records. And again, we're only limited by what we think and what we believe and what we understand. Right. So I had to very much create that process of sitting down, connecting, journaling, connect to the Akashic Records and journal what information I was getting. That's how I first started off. There's a mantra that we say to enter the records. And I absolutely love the mantra, just because it kind of like sets the tone, the time, the place, and my body is still so used to it that once I say it, I'm connected in to the records. But we're constantly in the records. We're constantly creating. We're constantly receiving information. We call it the subconscious. We call it, the conscious. We call it, And one of my students once said to me, what's the difference between the Akashic Records and being in a hypnotherapy kind of session? No, you're accessing your records through a process, a tool. to connect to this information or this wider web of information.
Yeah.
So connecting to the Akashic records is just consciously connecting to that. And it's not a place that we need to go to. And that's one misconception that I had, was the Akashic records is in the 8th dimension. So, we need to connect to the 8th dimension or whatever it is, but it isn't. We access the information based on what we vibrate at. Again, everything is back to vibration and frequency. So the more we're able to raise our vibrational frequency, the more we have access to. And then the other misconception of the Akashic records is that everything is love and light. No. And like, the Akashic records holds everything, the good, the bad, the ugly. It holds everything. And it's non-judgment. It just is. It's just fact, right? So it hosts a series of everything. So I started to realize, no, it's kind of like consciously connecting to the records. It just makes you become conscious of what you're doing or intentional about what you're doing. But we're all constantly, like, I honestly believe that Einstein was connecting to the Akashic records. Steve Jobs was connecting. They were creating the blueprint. They were accessing the blueprint of what they created.
Yeah. Okay. Number one, I totally thought that you had to go somewhere to access the Akashic records. So if our listener at home is like, damn it, don't worry, I feel that too. I felt like that as well. It makes sense that it would hold absolutely everything in a non-judgmental way, because I think as humans, we kind of add that level of good or bad, light or shade, as opposed to just looking at things as they are and as experience, and we add that emotional part of it onto it. Would it be appropriate for you to share the mantra if someone wanted to get into the Akashic? Would you feel comfortable with that?
Absolutely. And the mantra, so there's various school of thoughts in the mantra needs to be said in a certain language or in a certain way. The mantra, I can give you the mantra that I use.
I would love to hear it.
Yeah. So I usually say, and I say keepers of the Akashic records. So I say keepers of the Akashic records. Now you've got me on the spot here.
It's okay. Take your time.
Please create a safe and sacred space for my highest good and healing. Right. And then I say the records are now open, the records are now open. So it's, or usually I say keepers of the Akashic records, please open the records for, and you state the full name of the person because it brings in that vibrational frequency and create in sacred space for my highest good and healing. But I'll type it out for you and I'll send it to you.
Oh, wonderful.
And sometimes,
thank you.
Yeah, and sometimes I used to use a longer one where we call in our angels and our guides to support the journey as well.
Yeah, I love that. And it sounds to me that in a way, going back to intention, if you know what you're intending to do, you can create your own way of doing it. And if you could send me that, I can include at least, what you feel comfortable with in the show notes. And, people can really make their own recipe for it. Is that right? And you want it to be something you can remember and call on that resonates with your own soul.
Absolutely. And it changes based on how you change. So a lot of the times it's kind of like, I stopped saying in my highest and greatest good because sometimes we draw those experiences that are uncomfortable for that. And I've started talking about stepping into my highest potential. So doing everything from the place of highest potential, which is quite interesting.
I love that. And you know what? I really enjoyed how you talked about how, you access the level of the frequency that you're at. And I got this visual and it reminded me of, and when I do mediumship, I always bring down source energy in my room and I block all the exits and everything. And I bring in like this big, beautiful golden ball of golden light and sparkles and everything magical. And I was kind of thinking that, if you looked at the Akashic records like that, and you just take a little strand out of it, maybe that's the frequency that you're on. You can't access the whole thing, and you can access different elements, based on how you're feeling. How do you, keep your vibration high and navigate, the challenges? I know you talked earlier about taking things day by day, but, even in the work that I do, I'm really aware that when I'm really high and heightened, or like, a high vibration, that I get access to different things that if I'm not.
Okay, so it's quite an interesting question. So I spend a lot of time in nature, walking around, music. I play a lot of music first thing in the morning. It's like I'll be like, Alexa, play some happy music and see what tunes come in, and just to get that kind of like, get that going. But the important thing is about when we're in our low vibrational frequency is to feel the feelings 100%. And that's what it's, so a lot of the times we're like, no, I need to be light, love and light. No, we're having a human experience. We're here to experience it all, because and then this is why craniosacral therapy for me became very, very interesting, because we suppress a lot of the negative emotions. We suppress a lot of the darkness. And I'm like, no, feel it 100%. And this is where children teach us. And when they're upset, they're freaking upset. They like throwing things out, they're screaming, they're they're like, but when they're happy, they're 100% happy, right? When they're like, and it's feeling those feelings 100% in order to move through them. And this is what raises our frequency, or raises our vibe, is because then we don't have that percolating underneath because we've suppressed it, right? So it's kind of like, feel it, experience it, learn from it, release it. That's the important bit as well, because a lot of people, sometimes people get stuck in it and it's like sitting in it. No, you don't go and get yesterday's food out of the bin to re-eat that. No, it's done, it's gone, we let go of it, right? And that's how and it's a continuous, right? Because once we're always learning who we are. We're always looking at the limiting beliefs. We're always looking at, why did I draw this uncomfortable experience? And it's in the uncomfortable that we grow and we expand. And it's not that I go looking for shadow. It's just, if it appears, I deal with it, work with it, I embrace it, I choose it, because the other thing is, what we resist persists.
Yeah.
So it's like, choose it. Like, it's like, okay, bring it. Let's deal with this ugly monster, and let's get going with that.
Yeah. I just want to comment on that for a minute, because I know in my own personal experiences, when I experience something that's, less desirable or shadow, I feel that I do learn from it right away. And sometimes I will repeat it, I guess, but I do learn, I can see the lesson, but I find that, and I know it's ego that wants to continue to berate me or remind me of when I messed up and how I should have done better and I didn't, and blah, blah, blah. How do you kind of release? It's as though there's like an imprint. So it's the higher awareness, the higher awareness is like, well, damn, that was uncomfortable, but now we know what not to do. And now we know this has brought in all these other experiences. But then the other part of my brain wants to rehash it, I guess, almost make it dramatic. And sometimes it's really a struggle between the two. And yeah, I mean, what you resist persists 100%. And I know Eckhart Tolle, and I talk about him on the show every single episode, but he's my man. And, I'm very aware that it's happening, but sometimes it's just really difficult to kind of quiet that down. So does that mean that the emotion hasn't been released, or does that mean that there's some kind of remnants that I just need to try to look at objectively, a little bit like you were kind of talking about earlier, objectively?
So, absolutely. So it's a very good question, because I used to wake up in the middle of the night, kind of like replaying a lot
remember
of
when you screwed up? Right.
Yeah, remember when you spoke to that person like that, and you said something and you're really clumsy and you didn't mean that, and you hurt their. So now it took me a lot of practice in kind of like, it's observing the thought, seeing that it's there, and giving yourself grace and saying, okay, yeah, I did do that. Yeah, absolutely. I did do that. But what do I do? You can't go back and change the past, but what you can do is change the present. And the way you change the present is to action differently. So becoming an observant in awareness that, okay, that thought is, then go, no, ego. Because the ego, a lot of the time we reject the ego. We make the ego bad. But what we have to do is educate the ego and saying, okay, yeah, that was the old programming that I used to do, but now I'm choosing to do it this way. And it's kind of like, it's about how you change it today and changing the thought forms. So catching it right at the beginning, going, yeah, okay,
I did do that.
We're changing it. Yeah. It's like, stop. And sometimes I'd, even if it was playing a lot, because we're reprogramming. This is like thought program that we had for such a long time.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like stepping out of it. If there is emotion still attached to the trauma, there's still something underlying that needs to be resolved or brought to the surface. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Well, thank you. That's helpful. I find it frustrating sometimes. And I'm very aware that, when I feel superior or inferior, it's ego. And I know that my ego is important. And I do talk to her sometimes nicely, but sometimes I just get so wrapped up in the thoughts going around that I forget I can change them. And I teach people how to do this. It's kind of like what you were talking about earlier, when you should do your own stuff, but it's really easy to tell other people what they need to do instead. Yeah, and it's difficult, but I really love how you're like, no, I did do that, but I'm going to do that differently. And it's almost as though having that compassionate dialogue. And I love that you talked about giving yourself grace. And when you were talking earlier about going back to your maiden name, Lauren Grace is my real name, but it's not my last name. I used to go by by my real last name, but I found that energy was more masculine and more harsh, and I really wanted to embrace the grace, and that's my real name anyway, but I really wanted to bring that in. And so I love it that you use that as a reference, which I feel like in a way you were really supporting me in that, so thank you for that. I appreciate it. I guess I'm wondering, in terms of the Akashic records, how can people access that to maybe clear some of the things that they're carrying with them? Because, when you're talking about how if somebody, or, even my story potentially, that, maybe there's this underlining thing that needs to be cleared, that we have experiences that are catalysts to maybe help us bring it to the surface, to really shift it off so we can, move forward. How do people access those experiences? Do they have to relive them again? Do they have to go through that secondary trauma? Do they have to have the conversation with someone? What about if it's a past life? How do you know? Yeah, it just feels such a big
Yeah. Yeah, it's very layered, the work that it is very, very, very layered. So connecting to past lifetimes, or the way I connect to the Akashic records, again, through journaling is a great way, but asking what is the limiting belief, because we're only limited by our beliefs. And I think that's why I've had this interesting cultures, because the belief systems drive our behaviors. So what is the limiting belief? Is it mine that I've learned in this lifetime, or have I inherited this from a lineage perspective, or does it come from a past lifetime? So it's a great question to ask in the records once you're in there. So I usually kind of like meditate, connect, and you can ask the question. And I have a few kind of like meditations where I talk people through going into their records, asking the question and coming out. So there's quite a lot of those. So I'll give you my YouTube list, because there's a few meditations where we ask ourselves, what are my limitations right now? What's, stopping me from being happy? And it kind of like, it's looking at that programming behind that needs to change. And a lot of command work sometimes. So one is the awareness that we have of what the limitation is. So once it moves from the subconscious or the unconscious or whatever into the consciousness, now we need to be able to change it. Because to be consciously aware of a pattern that we keep doing that keeps us limited, that is choice. When it's unconscious, we navigate this world for what we know. But when it becomes conscious, we need to change it. And again, it's like changing it now. We can't change we only have now. So we can only change in the action that we do in this moment, moving forward. So it's really kind of like recognizing that. So for me recently, I learned that, and it's from my maternal lineage, is about keeping the peace constantly, right? And it's like, no, sometimes we need things to blow up in order to be able to resolve them, right? Because then again, it just sits there bubbling underneath the surface.
And you're stressed then at trying to control things and make sure everyone's peaceful and everything is, easy,
And that was all subconscious. I was like, I didn't know I was trying to manage all of these things. And I'm like, oh no, I'm going to let people feel their feelings, and it's going to be comfortable, and it's going to be okay. Right. So it's always a learning of that, but it's bringing that awareness in. So kind of like, and many modalities do that. Mine is the Akashic records. So it's kind of like, okay, so what are the limiting beliefs in around this area that I'm not seeing, right? And then the great thing about that is, because if you think of it as the matrix, and I usually see them as like, because I have IT background as well, is kind of zeros and ones, right? it's kind of like, how do I bring in that other programming that I'd like to reinstate the next aspect of the blueprint? So what is the choice or the decision that will put me into a timeline of my highest potential, right? So it's kind of like, how do I bring in those codes and integrate it into my physical, mental, emotional, and etheric level, which makes up this experience that I'm in now?
Okay, so I have my, I did my level 1 in theta healing. And so we taught in that, I was taught all about root level belief programming. And then the idea is that you go up to the creator's seventh level, seventh dimension, seventh level, and you see it, and then you witness, because you're not the healer, the creator's the healer, going in, removing the program, and then replacing it with the perfect program, or you can suggest or see what kind of comes through. So there's a command there that you say that is going to happen. We are removing that and we are replacing it with that. And you talked earlier about the command. So can you talk to me about the command, and do you have to replace the limiting belief in the way that you do your work in order to kind of put the new one in, or is it an acknowledgement is enough of a dilution, like a dissolvement of that?
So it's both. So sometimes, I do the command in the sense of, I remove, I release, and I do work with the violet flame. So sometimes I just add that in to remove those frequencies. And then I like to replace them if I know what it is, or I leave it open to create new ones. But I like to, if there is something that so for example, if I'm wanting to release procrastination, I'll replace it with action, or whatever it is that is coming to you. In that aspect. So it is very much about the command. And what happens with the command is, don't forget, we're creators. And sound is important. So that, fueled with your emotion, gives power to it. So if there's something you really release, it's kind of like, I remove, release, transform, transmute the frequency of X, and I replace it with that. And it's because it's our will. And a lot of the times saying, this is my will, because we are the creators of our environment. So we command that, which is important. And it works very similarly in the Akashic records for that. Or I work very similarly in the Akashic records for that.
One of the things I had that, kind of, I don't know if it was necessarily an aha moment, but basically, last year I was listening to a lot of Abraham Hicks's teachings, and, she's talking a lot about feeling the emotion and things like that. And I realized, I've been reprogramming, I'm 40 next week. So since I was, almost like 20 or something. So 20 years, it's crazy when you can say things like that. But anyway, over 20 years, I've been reprogramming my mind. And I've been doing that by being aware of thoughts, stopping the thought, replacing the thought with the truth, and then up leveling based on how, comfortable I was with certain things, like went from like myself to love myself and things like that. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I feel that I missed an integral part for so long, because I wasn't feeling everything. I was saying it, I was articulating it. And I know when we know better, we do better, and level of consciousness and we're at and all that. I get it. But the emotion, I didn't realize that the emotion was so critical and key to probably lasting change, to quicker change, to more significant progress.
Absolutely. And it's quite interesting, because I'm in the space of writing co-authoring an Akashic business book with my friend Kelly. Yeah, because your business has a blueprint, so it's connecting to that. Oh my
God, right? I can't wait to talk to you about that next time.
It's super exciting. But and we talk about, thoughts fueled by your emotion, put into place by your action, creates your reality. But it's that emotion. And a lot of people, so for example, anger, a lot of people are like, oh, I can't be angry. I'm like, yeah, be angry. It makes you feel alive. But how are you going to channel that anger? How are you going to use that energy to propel you in a way that is in alignment with what you're trying to do or become, right? So it's kind of like, even if it's like, I will never do that, or I'll never be that, I'm going to put that energy into actioning something that I do want, right? Or, whatever it is. So that emotion is important. The emotion of love, emotion of gratitude. We're constantly drawing towards us what we're vibrating at, and emotion is a huge part.
But you're also talking about directing the emotion into something instead of, which is what I feel like I'm like sharing my life story here, but I keep my emotions in. And that, and then that's why like I have to do yoga and all these things to like get rid of 25 years worth of stuff. But I love how you're talking about that redirection. It's like, oh, I'm feeling all of this. What are we gonna do with it? Where normally we go, we're gonna stuff it down real tight in our hips.
And that's where craniosacral comes in. We're like, let's remove this energy cyst that you've been, shoved into an organ somewhere.
Absolutely. Let's talk about craniosacral therapy. So I remember when I was in my 20s, I went to radio school, and when I was done, I was really passionate about spirituality. And so I ended up finding all of these practitioners, lucky for me, and I was able to try all their stuff. And then I would interview them about my experience. And I did do a session on craniosacral therapy, but I can't remember it at all. So I'm love to know a little bit more about it. And for our listener at home, this is the first guest we've had on the show in, over 300 episodes or something that actually is talking about craniosacral therapy. So I feel like this is maybe a divine message for myself. So I'd love to hear about what it is and how you got introduced to it. I mean, I know you said you were Googling and you found something, but.
No, so the craniosacral aspect of it was very, very interesting in the sense that I was doing Reiki and doing kind of like Reiki shares and all the rest of this. And a friend of mine said her massage therapist did cranial, and she said she was going to ask him what's the best way to work with Reiki. And he said, well, if she does Reiki, she should do cranial. And my friend wrote to me and I was like, what is this craniosacral therapy? Again, as I started Googling it, I was like, I got really, really excited. And I was like, okay, this is an alignment. So we did the trade, and he was like, okay, there's a big part of working with energy and working with the body. And what happened was craniosacral for me, it gave me a little bit more of the technical aspect behind what's happening with the body. So craniosacral therapy stems from osteopathy. And it's really sitting in, listening to the body. It's hands-on. I like to work with my hands. But what's happening is you're feeling into the tissue. You're feeling into where the trauma is. You're looking into the fascia, and where it's pulling, where it's tugging. You're really monitoring the cranial spinal fluid to make sure that that's all in alignment and that's running at 100%, and that it drops the nervous system, so it completely calms the nervous system. There's mechanisms to reset your nervous system, and that's why it brings this calm. But the great thing that I found about working with craniosacral therapy is all those emotions, all that trauma that we store in the body, because it has to go somewhere.
Yeah,
it's an amazing way to release that through. And they won't say energy, they'll call it direction of energy, because they're trying to keep it very much scientific. Okay. But there is even a part where they talk about the chakras and releasing the energy from the energy. And I got super excited. This was kind of like in level 3. They're like, so we have these energy centers. And I'm like, yeah, they're called chakras.
They have colors too.
Yeah, exactly. But they teach how to work with that energy, which is super amazing from that perspective. But it is really going into the body and releasing the energy cysts that we suppress into the system, right? Right. So it's yeah, and it's a little bit more technical because it does get a little bit more anatomical. For me, it's helped me with my the Akashic because of working with the nervous system. So we receive a lot of our messages intuitively, it's through the nervous system that we're working through that. And when I do kind of like intergenerational clearings, I do it through the nervous system and then on a cellular level. But we're always looking for that 0 point in the body. That's what I call it, rebooting the system. So we're looking for that, and it helps to unwind. So there's a lot of traumas that we carry, and it helps the body remembers. So it almost kind of like helps to unwind the certain. Yeah, it's actually it's
visual. Yeah. And you think about it, as we go through life, we experience things, and sometimes we're not in a situation where we can fully deal with them, or we even forget about it, oh yeah, that happened. When I'm kind of remembering now, I think when I got craniosacral therapy, I feel like the person touched my head, like on either side. So when you're talking about hands-on, are you touching the person's head? Do you move to other parts of the body as well? And how does that work for remote, or is it not a remote thing?
Okay, so the institution would not be happy with me kind of like using the techniques remotely, but it can be used remotely because we're feeling into, so for example, and my teachers spoke about this, where you're talking to somebody over the phone and you could feel their cranial rhythm and see if it's in alignment, if it's in sync. And a lot of the times, depending on how much trauma has been had, you can also dialogue with the person, which brings in the somato-emotional release aspect of it as well, where you go into the memory of the trauma in order to release it with craniosacral therapy at the same time. But we do very much work on the head and kind of like loosen up all the sutures, and we start to make sure that sometimes the C1 and C2 is kind of like lodged in there, so we tend to kind of like move the bones very, very lightly, very, very calmly, to accommodate for this fluid of energy to continue to move through your systems.
Wow, that's beautiful. And while you're saying that, you're like, well, it probably would be nice to have it in a physical way, where someone's actually physically assisting you with that healing. Did you read Eckhart Tolle's work? Are you familiar with his work?
A lot of it. I have a couple of his books that I haven't read yet, but
girl.
some of his,
Anyway, I'll connect you because after I'll give it to you, or our listeners like, what about me? Okay, well, there's a podcast called it's Eckhart Tolle's podcast, but the first 10 episodes are him and Oprah, and they do a new earth together, and they did 10 1-hour conversations. It was on YouTube where they went through every chapter, and it was really amazing. So if anyone's wanting to read that book, I would recommend that you do it with the podcast, because it's like you're going to school, and it's so cool. The reason why I'm bringing it up though is because he doesn't have a lot of he doesn't put a lot on memory, because it's all about the now moment, so he doesn't spend a lot of effort on like what things happened. And I really liked that when I was reading that, because it made me feel that, sometimes we do things we wish we hadn't, but we learned a lesson, or we say things, like we're not perfect, we're human, we're working through stuff. And, when you're talking about the body unraveling the memory, how does that work for people who don't want to experience those memories again? Do they have to go through that in order to heal? Is there an acknowledgement, or can it just kind of happen in a casual way? Because I think that stops a lot of people from seeking assistance, because they don't want to be faced with that or share that with other people,
So absolutely. And I don't believe in re-traumatizing the body.
Yeah.
However, sometimes we need to be aware of what happened in order to move from it. So that sometimes one or two things happen where I'm working on somebody and they'll start crying. They don't know why, whatever it is, but that's that emotional release that is being released, right? Sometimes you do have a memory, right? But not always do you have the memory of that. So yeah, I also, memory is huge, because it's all in the now, because that doesn't exist anymore. It's just our attachment that exists. Right.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are also kind of like, oh, my memory, actually in general, our memory is going. And when I tapped into that, it's because we're downloading new information as we're moving through.
It doesn't matter, because we can't
matter. It's the old,
Yeah, it's the old. And it's kind of, I think it was when I was listening to Wayne Dyer, and he was talking a lot about, I think, and you might be able to correct me because you probably know better, but I'm pretty sure what I remember him saying was that the body reinvents itself every 7 years or something like that.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So we're not the same person that we were, I don't know, I guess it would happen every 7 years, probably around that. So for every 7 years, you're in some kind of a shift, like a snake, you're shedding the skin. It would make sense that that would happen with memories too.
So our organs are constantly regenerating itself. So with regards to kind of like, you know, we take the DNA, the RNA is currently producing those cells. And some organs reproduce themselves faster than others. I think the liver takes about 7 years, as you're saying, to reproduce. So we are constantly changing who we are. But don't forget, our thoughts are also create the environment to which our organs live in as well. So Bruce Lipton talks a lot about that. So we're constantly creating the environment around us, and all of our cells are constantly listening to the dialogue that's happening in our head, right? So if we're constantly beating ourselves up, the organs are feeling that. And a lot of the times I like to talk about it kind of like a flower. You know, if a flower is withering, you don't, you know, starve it, you change its environment, you give it more food, you give it more light, you give it more love, you give it more caring. So our bodies are constantly listening. So what food are we placing? What kind of, you know, and that's why we can't attack, we're attached to these memories. And I call them anchors because they keep us stuck in the past. They keep us stuck to that trauma. And that's why it's important to do the healing aspect of it and let go of that, because we're not that person anymore. We're as you say, we're not even the person we were 10 minutes ago before we were having this conversation. We're constantly changing versions of we only have right now. That's the important thing to notice.
Yeah, it is. And it's so key. And when you get it, you're like, wow. And then you forget. And then you're like, wow, I know there's only the now, but I can't really feel it right now because I feel like this other thing's happening.
So where the past happens is great to connect to is in the lessons or the knowledge and wisdom that we've acquired from those past experiences. And that's where I find that, you know, so yes, I learned that from that. And because of that, I now do things this way. You know, so it's bringing the knowledge and wisdom. Otherwise, again, for me, it was like, then why did we go through that? It's to carry that knowledge forward with us.
Yeah, and hindsight's 2020, and when you're in it, you don't always understand, or sometimes, like I shared earlier, you do, but you also are working through understanding it, you know, which is always interesting.
So one cool trick that I've learned recently about hindsight is if you ask yourself, instead of why is this happening to me, ask yourself, why is this happening, or how is this happening for me? That brings hindsight into now, right? Because you look at like, oh, because hindsight is, oh, that happened because of that, and brought me to here. No, it's like asking, okay, how is this happening for me now? Helps you to bring hindsight to like now, right? Which is great.
Right. And you could probably use that as well if you find yourself repeating patterns or the same conversations are popping up in your head, you know, the same memories and stuff like that. Reminders.
Absolutely.
I had a really interesting guest on the show a couple months ago, Susan Corso, and we talked a lot about chakras. And she was talking about how she believes that anything physical in the body is actually derivative of something going on within your chakra system. Are you familiar with that based on the work you do with craniosacral therapy?
So both the craniosacral therapy and the Akashic records. So remember how I was telling you we create that blueprint? We create the blueprint integrated into our chakras as well. So I think it's all systems, all of our systems are working together in the same way. It's all part of the same kind of like experience that we're going to, but I agree with her in the sense that, you know, it's all imprinted. So what we're wanting to experience, the limitations, the gifts, the expansion, you know, that's why we're sometimes one chakra is more prominent than the other. And we're constantly working on them because everything works in synergy with each other, the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the etheric. And the chakras are really, you know, based in the etheric aspect of who we are, which is our energy center that provides energy to the body. And it also, if we look at it in terms of healing, again, it's like, and this is, I think, the Eastern philosophies, it all starts with thought, our emotions, and then the last protocol is the body. So yes, I agree that they all working symbiotically together, and it's all imprinted. Yeah.
I was doing a reading for someone yesterday on Facebook, and I was talking about how, you know, all the decisions that they've made up until now has taken them to where they are in this moment. And, you know, when you're talking about thought, if things are showing up in your body or in your environment that aren't in line with what you want, it's your own doing. You've really set the course for that. But what I love about our conversation today is you talk about things in such a way that's empowering, and you're going, okay, yeah, you can sit there and be a victim, or you can go, okay, how is this working for me? What can I see from this? What can I learn? How can I move forward? Can I play some happy music? Can I get out in nature? Can I change the course of my entire life right now from just doing something different?
Absolutely. And you know where I've really tested that? Those mornings where things just start off awfully, everything goes wrong. It's kind of like, how can I change this as quickly as I can? Because you can either allow that energy to persist through the rest of the day, or like, okay, let's change this, like right now. Like, how can I change this next moment in my life to shift that?
Yeah. And so how do you do it? Do you listen to the music? Do you get into nature? Kind of some of the things we said? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I absorb it. Like, and I see, okay, because this is what's happening. Okay, that is gone. Let's start this moment new. So every breath is a new beginning. Every minute, every hour, you don't have to wait for the next day, is a new beginning. It's that kind of like, okay, let's reset this in this moment. Deal with it. It's gone. It's done. And it's taken practice to let go. That's the thing, is surrendering, letting go is kind of like, okay, this is what it is. How can I action something differently? How can I change my mode of thought? And that's where kind of like play the special tunes, because that automatically puts you in a good mood, right? That automatically shifts movement, like get rid of that, dance a little bit, whatever, go for a walk, go for a run. It's managing that energy in a sense of siphoning it through. Right. And then some days it's just difficult to do that. Like, it's just like, okay, I'm here again. Okay,
go back to bed.
Go back to bed, go to sleep. That'll help. Sometimes it's like, I'm going to take a nap. Maybe I'll wake up in a better mood, right?
Yeah. But I think it comes down to what you're talking about, which is having grace for yourself. And that's something I really struggle with. I will say I am so hard on myself. I have this level of wanting to be perfect, and not even perfect, but I guess just the best version as I possibly can. And it's just not always possible. And, yeah.
I've started seeing things, so moving away from perfectionism, because perfectionism caps us, because you can't improve on perfect.
No, you can't. Damn it.
No, so it's all about progression. And that's why perfect becomes this moment, in this moment is perfect as it is. How do I progress from that? How do I expand from that?
Not perfection, progress. Yeah. And and if we were already, let's say, perfect, just for lack of a better word, we would be out of here because we wouldn't have things to do.
Yeah. And that would be boring.
Yeah. That would be boring. Can I ask you one more question? It's a little bit off subject, and I don't know whether or not you can, you can even speak to this, but I was kind of thinking to myself a little bit about balancing the masculine and the feminine energies. And I feel that for myself, I have a difficult time sometimes with understanding whether or not, like, let's say my right knee is sore. Okay, does that mean that I have too much masculine, or am I afraid of moving forward, or I haven't been balancing my feminine? And I don't know about you, but I think that as a woman, sometimes it's difficult to balance the feminine and the masculine, and to kind of understand how to match the two. And I would imagine that somebody who identifies as male would have a difficult time with being masculine, but also embracing that feminine. Do you have any thoughts on that? And does that have anything to do with left or right brains or hemispheres or anything like that in craniosacral therapy?
Absolutely. So we do balance the right left brain for that as well. So it's understanding that we are both masculine and feminine. If we're in a feminine body, we tend to be maybe 60%, more feminine than masculine. And I've started to learn, and this might be a little bit controversial, it's not about bringing balance to one. Makes sense, but we don't always have to be in balance with masculine and feminine.
Sometimes we don't always need both elements, right? We're sometimes working from the feminine. Sorry to cut you off, I just got excited.
Absolutely, absolutely. So for example, when I moved countries, I had to be very much in my masculine because it's very much about paperwork, logic, moving forward, process, all the
Right.
rest of that. I had to step into that. But when I'm with my children, it's the nurturing, the caring, the intuition, the irradical, the spontaneity aspect of it. So it's playing with the energies when you need it. We also live very much in a very masculine dominated kind of like era. We've had it so much, and it's a lot of the times when it comes to business or it comes to relationships, it's hard to fall into the feminine aspect of it because we've just been so trained to step into our masculine. So I'm actually working a lot on that at the moment and trying to understand where I sit within that. But I have learned that, yes, it's good to bring into balance. So if your right knee is hurting, it is the direction that you don't want to go into. And or there's a resistance with continuing in that way. And that's where Louise Hay's kind of like book comes in, and
Feel
a few others.
Yeah.
Of listening to your body and what's going on there. So kind of like, especially if you have lower back issues, you're looking at, again, into the chakras, your root, your sacral. It's all about, fear, financial, all the rest of that. Where am I holding that in the body? But yeah, with regards to those energies, yes, it's good to balance them out when we're too much in one and it's not in balance, but sometimes we need one more than the other.
Yeah. And I guess, I mean, how do you figure that out? And when you were talking, I was thinking about, of course, it makes sense for you because you worked in corporate IT. You would be working with mostly men. I mean, it was interesting that you work with a female who bullied you, which is like not cool, but we know she taught you a lesson and we're thankful for those people because we've all had them. But still, I can imagine that you would have had to show up almost wearing a different hat,
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a lot of what because I did marketing, so a lot of me was translating IT to English. So there's that creative side, but understanding the what is the technical side of it, and how do I bring in the feminine energy and explaining it and expressing it, right? So
that's so cool. I love that. Well, I feel like, we're kind of nearing the end. I absolutely love talking to you. You're so intelligent and so well articulated. Thank you so much, Natasha. I know you have a special message for our listeners at home. And I would love for you to share that. I would also love for you to share just anything you feel called to speak on, any conversation that you wanted to talk about that we didn't go to today, and also how people can get a hold of you eventually. You can go there too.
Absolutely. So I got a wee message this morning, and it basically said, so I journaled this. So it said, "Dear Afterlight conscious souls, today and every day we ask you to shine the light, your light, and step into your highest potential. What this means is being authentically you. Those that are in alignment will stay, and those that are not will go. And keep working on yourselves, getting to know who you are and what you're wanting to experience. So keep dissolving the trauma, the past, and by changing your words, your actions, and your thoughts, so that they align with the frequencies of the world you're wanting to create. So keep doing the inner work with compassion, with grace for self. As we change and progress, we become conscious of who we are and what we create. And we create it all. We become sorry, my handwriting changes here. We become intentional, consciously creating our destiny, as they put in inverted commas. As we continue to heal and release the limitations of the past, we step into expansion. We start to see the divinity that we already are. And that's from my guide, Emmanuel. So that was my little treat.
That's so beautiful. I love that. And I think it's such a strong reminder. And, I feel like I had a lot of reminders in this episode. I feel like it was really important that I have this conversation today. And, I think that, and I don't know if our listener at home can relate, or if even you can relate, but when we know better, I think sometimes we just still forget that we have to keep showing up every day and doing the work. And it doesn't have to be doing the work. It's a hard slog. It can be joyful and full of light. It's just about, kind of like your message is talking about, being the vibration that you want, and remembering that if you're not sitting in that you have to shift it, because nothing else can shift it, without your permission, without you being active.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, totally.
I love that. Well, my sister, I will put a link to all your stuff in the show notes. I think you have a special offer for our listener at home as well if they'd like to work with you.
Absolutely. So for anybody that listens to the show and would like an Akashic record session to access their soul's blueprint, I'll give you a 20% discount. You just have to quote Afterlife, and I'll provide the discount for sure.
Perfect. Absolutely love that. Thank you so much, my sister, for being here. It's such a pleasure to know you. Thank you for sharing your gift with our listener and myself today. It's just been such an exciting conversation. I cannot wait to have you back on the show when we can talk about the Akashic in terms of business, because I'm also a businesswoman and I love that. And I think it's really due something like that in the market. So thank you so much for everything today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I've loved talking to you. And anytime you need anything, just shout.
Awesome.